So, I was thinking maybe you could help me out. Just until things stabilize, he said, avoiding eye contact, pretending we were close. There was a pause. One of those long, quiet ones that stretched between two people who used to know each other, once upon a time. Alone? I asked, as if I didn't hear it the first time. He nodded.
Yeah, just a little something.
You know, family helps family, right? I wanted to laugh. Or cry. Or maybe both. This was the same brother who, just 2 years ago, told me to just move on when I was sobbing in the hospital parking lot after losing everything. The same brother who rolled his eyes when I tried to talk about grief. Back then, I didn't even need money. I just needed him to see me. Now here he was, knocking on my door, telling me how rent was high and his startup failed, and could I maybe spare $10,000? I looked at him and realized something. I wasn't angry. I was done. Growing up with Jake was like living in a shadow you could never escape. Not because he was a monster or cruel. No, that would have been easier to understand. It was because he was golden. The boy who could do no wrong. The one who got a standing ovation for showing up while I was quietly building the stage. My name's Harper, Harper Lynn Morgan. And from as far back as I can remember, I was the quiet one. The helper. The one who never caused trouble. That sounds nice, doesn't it? But what it really meant was invisible. Jake was 2 years older. Handsome, loud, confident in a way that always seemed to put people at ease. Teachers adored him. Girls wrote his name on their notebooks. Coaches called him a natural leader, even when he missed practice. He had this charming recklessness that made everyone forgive him in advance. Meanwhile, I was the one who cleaned up the messes no one noticed. When Jake got AD in chemistry, Mom stayed up with him baking brownies for his teacher the next day. When I got straight as 3 semesters in a row, she said, "Well, you've always been book smart. That's your thing." I remember once, in 6th grade, I made this diorama for a science fair. I stayed up for 3 nights, cutting and gluing, researching marine biology because I loved the ocean. I got 2nd place. Jake won a different prize for a paper he copied mostly from Wikipedia, but the whole ride home was about his natural intelligence. That kind of thing adds up. Birthdays were another story. Jake's parties had themes: laser tag, rented bouncy houses, ice cream bars. Mine? Mostly family, a grocery store cake, and a few cousins whose parents made them come. I stopped asking for parties after I turned 13. I told myself I didn't like crowds. But deep down, I just didn't like the disappointment. Dad, Robert, was the quiet type. Not absent, but not emotionally available either. He worked a lot. Engineering firm. Long hours. When he was home, he read the paper or watched sports with Jake. He didn't really get me. I was always reading, drawing, writing in journals. I think he respected that, but he didn't know what to do with it. I learned to be low maintenance. I handled my own homework, cooked my own meals when Mom was working late, even taught myself how to apply for scholarships. No one asked if I needed help. I think they assumed I had it all figured out. The truth? I didn't. I was just quiet about it. College was my escape. I got into a good university on the East Coast, full scholarship. I packed up and left without much fanfare. Jake stayed in California, bouncing from one business idea to another. First it was flipping sneakers, then a car detailing service, then some crypto venture that I never really understood. Every time it flopped, Mom and Dad bailed him out. Quietly. Automatically. I, on the other hand, learned how to stretch $50 for a whole week of groceries. I worked at the library, tutored biology, and pulled 3 a.m. shifts at the campus cafe. No one sent care packages. No one asked if I was sleeping. I never told them when I cried myself to sleep in my dorm, wondering why it felt like I had to earn love. After graduation, I moved to Portland, got a job as a medical research assistant. It wasn't flashy, but it was stable, and it was mine. I was finally building something for myself, piece by piece. Jake, meanwhile, posted photos from Vegas and rented cars he couldn't afford. Entrepreneur life, he'd caption them. One day, he bought our mom a designer purse. Just because, he said. Everyone clapped like he was a hero. I sent flowers for her birthday. She texted thanks with a heart emoji. It was during this time I hit my own wall. I was dating someone, Ethan. We'd been together 2 years. Thought he was the one. He proposed. I said yes. 3 months later, I walked in on him with someone else. Someone I had introduced him to. I was shattered. Like can't breathe, world is collapsing kind of pain. My first thought?
Call Jake.
I don't know why. I think I just wanted someone to show up. I called. He answered. Jake, I was crying.
He cheated.
I don't know what to do. I feel like I can't even stand. There was a pause. Then he said, Harper, you gotta just move on. Don't get dramatic. I'll never forget that. I hung up without saying a word. Sat on the floor of my apartment for hours. The only person who called back was my college roommate. Jake didn't even text. That was the moment I started withdrawing. I stopped showing up to family calls. Skipped Thanksgiving. Didn't send Christmas gifts. I didn't explain it to anyone because no one had ever really explained anything to me. And just like that, no one noticed I was gone. Until I started winning. See, I got promoted.
Twice.
Published my first research paper in a major journal. Got invited to speak at a conference in New York. A colleague of mine introduced me to a nonprofit that works with STEM education for girls, and suddenly I was on the board. I bought my first condo. Then a second which I rented out. My savings grew.
Slowly.
Quietly.
Safely.
No one in my family congratulated me because they didn't know. Then Jake's newest business failed. And suddenly he remembered I existed. He called.
Said he was proud of me.
That I'd really built something. And then came the ask. Hey, Harp, he said over the phone. I'm in a bit of a tough spot. Wondering if you could spot me alone. Just temporary. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes. I just said, you told me to move on, remember? He was quiet for the first time in a long time. After Jake told me to just move on, something in me unraveled. Not like a dramatic breakdown, no.
It was quieter than that.
Like a subtle unraveling of a thread that had been pulled for years, and I'd finally stopped trying to tie it back together. For a while, I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. People say dumb things in moments they don't understand, right? Maybe Jake was just being awkward. Maybe he didn't know how to handle emotions that weren't his own. But days turned into weeks. Then months. He never checked back in. Not once. Not even when Mom mentioned in passing that I'd returned my engagement ring and gone completely silent. Not even when I deactivated social media and changed my number. He didn't try. And that, more than his words, is what broke me. The next time I saw Jake was 6 months later, at Dad's birthday dinner. I hadn't planned on going, but guilt has a way of showing up like an uninvited guest, especially when you've been the good daughter for so long. We met at a steakhouse Dad loved. The kind of place with leather booths and too loud jazz. Jake walked in 20 minutes late, wearing a bomber jacket and white sneakers like he was still 25 and invincible. He gave Mom a big kiss on the cheek, tossed a casual, "Hey, Harp, my way," and ordered a whiskey neat. It was like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't hung up on me when I was falling apart. I watched him charm the table, tell half-true stories about his latest venture, a digital marketing agency, partnering with major brands, and casually complain about how banks just don't want to help small businesses anymore. When the check came, he reached for it dramatically, then handed it to Dad. I stayed quiet the whole night, until we were walking to our cars, just the two of us under the orange parking lot lights. He said, "Hey, Harp. You good?" I didn't answer. He nudged my arm. Still mad at me? I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel little in his presence. I didn't feel like I owed him anything. I just felt clear. "You don't get to call it mad," I said softly. "You dismissed me at the lowest point in my life. You told me to move on like I wasn't even human." He blinked. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I said. "And it's okay if you didn't know what to say. But you never tried."
Not then.
Not after. You didn't care. He opened his mouth but didn't say anything. I got in my car and drove off. That was the night the shift became permanent. I stopped showing up to everything after that. Birthday dinners. Holidays. Family group chats. I quietly exited the story they had always written me into, the one where I was supposed to keep the peace, stay small, and never ask for too much. And you know what happened? Nothing. No one came looking. No one asked where I went. Until 2 years later, the day Jake showed up at my front door with that sheepish grin and said the words I'll never forget. I could really use a favor. It was surreal. He stood there like we were still close. Like the last 2 years of silence and disinterest had evaporated with a single smile. I've got a deal in the works, he explained, but I just need a little boost.
10 grand.
Short term. You'll have it back in 2 months, tops.
I didn't speak.
I just stared at him. He kept talking. Told me how he'd heard I was doing pretty well. How proud he was of me. How the family always knew you'd turn out solid. The nerve.
He didn't ask how I was.
Didn't mention the years he spent making me feel like background noise. Didn't apologize for that night when I called him from the ER parking lot, heartbroken and shaking. He just asked for money. And when I didn't immediately say yes, he frowned, like I was the one being unreasonable. I mean, come on, Harp. Family helps family. I laughed. Not bitterly. Not angrily. Just softly. Because that was the moment I realized we had been living two different versions of this family. In his version, he was the charismatic risk-taker, and I was the reliable safety net. The invisible support system that always caught him on the way down. But in mine, I was the forgotten one, the background singer, the emotional mule who had carried the weight for so long without even realizing it. I didn't tell him no. Not right away. I just said, let me think about it. He nodded, relieved. Thanks, Harp. I knew you'd come through. Then he left, like everything was fine again. That night, I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the things he never knew about me. How I paid off my student loans 5 years early. How I spent my weekends volunteering at a clinic downtown. How I had donated money to send 5 girls to STEM camp last summer. How I cried in silence for years over the way my own family treated me, and how I finally stopped expecting them to change. I thought about all the ways I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, brick by brick,
Alone.
and now the person who once told me to just move on wanted a handout. The irony was almost poetic. The morning after Jake asked me for that loan, I made a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and pulled up my online banking account. Not because I was considering helping him, but because I needed to see it. The numbers. The years of quiet sacrifice that brought me here. There it was. My emergency fund. My investments. The 2 properties I owned outright. My business savings account. I had done this. Not because anyone handed me a shortcut. Not because I had connections or a family safety net. I had built this brick by careful brick, while Jake had jumped from shortcut to shortcut, expecting everyone else to build the foundation for him. It was in that moment, quiet, simple, and deeply personal, that I made the decision. I wasn't going to give him the money. But I also wasn't going to explain why. I didn't owe him that. For the first time in my life, I wasn't interested in making anyone understand me. Instead, I started pulling back in ways that were nearly invisible. I changed my number again. Set all my accounts to private. I stopped replying to family group texts. I declined invites without guilt or explanation. The freedom was intoxicating. For years, I had been the emotional plug that kept the circuit going, the one who remembered birthdays, who sent flowers for anniversaries, who booked the family dinners, made the apologies no one else wanted to make.
But now?
Now I just stopped. I unsubscribed from the role I never signed up for. And the silence that followed? It wasn't lonely. It was peace. I started doing things I had always postponed for someone else's convenience. I enrolled in a weekend ceramics class, something I'd wanted to do since college. I booked a solo trip to Seattle. I spent Sundays hiking without checking my phone every hour. I even cleared out the emergency contact section of my phone. Jake had still been listed there. I replaced him with my best friend, Camille. When the family called, and they did occasionally, I kept the conversations polite but distant. Mom asked why I was so quiet lately. I told her, just focusing on myself. She didn't push. Dad didn't notice. Jake, for a while, kept sending me follow-ups. First, they were polite. Hey, just checking in, no pressure. Let me know if you gave it some thought. Then, a little more impatient. Would really appreciate a response. Even a no. Then guilt-ridden.
Wow.
Cold. I would have helped you in a heartbeat. That message made me laugh. He would have helped me? Like the time I called him crying outside the ER? Or when I moved into my first apartment with hand-me-down furniture and no one offered to help me move.
No.
Jake had never shown up unless there was applause waiting for him. I didn't respond. Not because I was trying to punish him, but because responding would imply I still needed something from him. His approval. His understanding.
His apology.
I didn't. Instead, I poured all that energy back into myself. I expanded my nonprofit work, mentored 2 high school girls from underfunded schools. One of them, Tasha, reminded me of myself at 16, smart, quiet, overlooked. She didn't say much during our first few sessions. But one day, as we packed up, she looked at me and said, "You're the first adult who talks to me like I'm not a problem." That hit me harder than Jake ever could. Because that is what healing looks like. Not revenge. Not grand gestures. Just quietly becoming someone you needed when you were younger. Camille noticed the change in me. Over dinner one night, she said, "You look lighter. Like you're finally breathing." "I think I am," I replied. For the first time. Jake's messages eventually stopped. No final goodbye. No confrontation. Just silence. And that silence wasn't sad. It was sacred. Sometimes people don't change. Sometimes they don't apologize. And sometimes they really do believe they've done nothing wrong. And that's okay, because healing doesn't require permission from the people who hurt you. I didn't announce my growth to the world. I didn't post long captions or cryptic quotes. I didn't broadcast that I had outgrown the roles they cast me in. I simply lived differently. And that was enough. Every time I chose not to answer the phone, not to explain myself, not to chase their approval, I was choosing myself. Every quiet no was a loud yes to my peace. Every boundary was a soft rebirth. And as the months passed, I realized something stunning. My life got better, not because Jake changed, but because I did. Something changed in me the moment my brother said, "I mean, you've got it now. What's 10 grand to you?" It wasn't just the words, it was how casually he said them. Like my struggles had been a quick phase. Like the nights I spent curled up on my floor crying for mom didn't count. Like the meals I skipped to keep my apartment weren't real. And that's when it hit me. Daniel had no idea who I had become, because he never bothered to look. I sat back and looked around my living room. Everything here I earned. The candles flickering on the side table, the plush navy sofa I saved 3 months for, the soft hum of a jazz playlist I curated for peace, it all had me in it. It was built with grit, not luck. 10 grand isn't about the money, Daniel, I said slowly. It's about everything you never asked me about. He frowned. What does that mean? I stared at him, really stared, and said, "Where were you when I was sleeping in my car?" He blinked. "You never told me that." "No," I said. "Because when I tried to talk, you told me to get over it. That I was being dramatic. That I should just move on." "So I did, Daniel. I moved on from you too." His face flushed, and he looked down embarrassed. But I didn't stop. "You have no idea what I went through. You never visited after the funeral. Never asked how I was surviving. You didn't even come to my graduation, Daniel. And now you want to act like we're still what? Close." He didn't respond. I wasn't saying it to be cruel. I wasn't even raising my voice. But something had been unlocked inside me, like a chain around my heart had snapped loose. I stood up, walked to the shelf, and pulled out a small box. Inside was an old photo of us, me and Daniel, sitting on Mom's porch, faces smeared with ice cream, laughing. We couldn't have been older than 10. I handed it to him. "I loved you once," I whispered. "And maybe part of me always will. But the person you became? The brother who disappeared when I needed him most? I had to bury her along with Mom." He swallowed hard. "So no, I said finally. I'm not giving you a loan. Because I paid the price to be here. And you never even said sorry. It was the first time in my life I chose myself, fully, without guilt. And it felt like exhaling after years underwater. Daniel sat frozen, the photograph trembling in his hand. The silence between us stretched out like a chasm. I could tell he wasn't expecting me to say no. Not because he thought I owed him, but because he still believed he was the one holding power in this relationship. But he wasn't. Not anymore. I didn't know you were going through all that, he said finally. His voice cracked, just slightly. If I had known. I stopped him with a glance. You didn't want to know, Daniel. You made it easy to look away. He flinched like I'd struck him. Then he stood, awkwardly placing the photo back on the table. Look, I get it. You're angry. You have a right to be. But this wasn't just about me needing help. I wouldn't ask if it weren't serious. Then maybe ask the people who were there for you, I said calmly. Like you told me to do, remember? Move on.
Get over it.
That's what I did. He scoffed, frustration bubbling up. So, this is what success did to you? Turned you cold. I smiled, not out of amusement, but understanding.
No.
This isn't success. This is healing. This is boundaries.
Daniel didn't like that.
He grabbed his jacket and muttered under his breath. Fine. Forget it. But just as he reached the door, I said, Daniel? He turned, not looking at me directly. I hope you get what you need, I said. But not just the money. I hope you sit with yourself and ask why your sister had to rebuild without you, and how you were okay with that.
His eyes finally met mine.
There was something new there. Not quite remorse, but the beginning of it. Then he left. I stood in the quiet of my apartment for a long time. My hands were shaking, but not from regret, from release. I had waited years for an apology that never came, and I finally realized I didn't need it to close the door. That night, I lit a candle for Mom. I did it. I whispered to the flame. I said what I needed to say. The next morning, I got a text from Daniel. Just 3 words. I'm really sorry. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because forgiveness isn't a bridge you walk just because the other person waves from the other side. It's something you cross when your soul feels safe again. I wasn't there yet, but I was on my way. 3 weeks passed. I didn't block Daniel's number. I didn't delete the message. But I also didn't reply. Something shifted in me that day. Not out of vengeance, but clarity. For so long, I believed healing meant reconciliation. That standing up for myself would be cruel.
But now?
I saw it differently. I saw peace as protection, not a performance. One morning, while watering my tiny balcony garden in my Los Angeles apartment, I got a call. Unknown number. I usually wouldn't pick up, but something nudged me. Hello. Hi. Is this Natalie Brooks? I froze. Yes, who's calling? This is Angela Ramsey. I'm the executive director of the West Haven Survivors Grant Program. You submitted your application a few months ago. My heart started to thump. I just wanted to inform you, she continued. You've been selected as this year's primary recipient. Your story moved the entire board. And your nonprofit pitch, it was brilliant. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Ms. Brooks, we're granting you $250,000 to fund Grace House, your vision to support women starting over after domestic abuse. I nearly dropped the phone. Tears slipped down my cheeks like they had a mind of their own. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Say you're ready, she smiled through the phone. And I was. That same night, I got a voicemail from Daniel. He didn't ask for money. Not this time. Nat, I've been thinking about everything. I was wrong. Not just recently, but back then, too. I minimized your pain because I didn't know how to deal with my own guilt. I pushed you away when I should have protected you. He paused, then added something I wasn't expecting. I enrolled in therapy. I sat down, stunned. And no, this isn't a setup for another ask. I'm just trying to start my own work. I don't expect anything from you, but I do hope someday we talk again. As real siblings. No shame between us. The phone beeped. The message ended. And I just sat there, staring at the dark window reflection of myself, not broken, not abandoned, not angry anymore, just still. In that moment, I realized the real shift had already happened. This wasn't about a loan or an apology or even my brother. It was about me finding my voice again. I opened my laptop and finalized the nonprofit launch announcement for Grace House. The name came from Mom's middle name, Grace, the woman who taught me to endure, and the memory that reminded me to rise. And as I hit post, I whispered to the night air, I didn't just move on, I moved up. It's strange how the people who once told you to just move on come knocking when your healing finally starts to shine. I didn't give Daniel a loan, but I did something better. I forgave him without needing a response. Not for his sake. For mine. Grace House opened its doors 6 months later in a quiet neighborhood in Pasadena. The house had old bones, soft yellow walls, and a front porch swing that became the heart of every late-night conversation. The first woman who stepped through our doors was named Charisse. She carried one small duffel bag and a baby on her hip. Her eyes were tired but determined, the same look I'd once worn in the mirror. And when she said, I don't have anyone left, I smiled and said, You do now. Word spread quickly. Grace House became more than a shelter. It became a sanctuary, a place of restoration. We taught workshops, offered therapy, and even brought in career mentors. I watched women who had been shattered walk out months later with light in their eyes and resumes in their hands. Every single one of them had been told by someone to just move on. And every single one of them had learned what I did, that healing isn't passive. It's work. Sacred, messy, defiant work. As for Daniel, he stayed in touch.
Slowly.
Thoughtfully. He never asked for money again. Instead, he asked questions. About my work. About healing.
About Mom.
About the silence that had lived between us for too long. He even showed up for our ribbon-cutting ceremony, quietly at the back, wearing a suit I didn't recognize and holding a bouquet of daisies, Mom's favorite. He didn't make a speech. He didn't try to take credit. But when I looked at him across the lawn filled with laughter and music and resilience, I gave a small nod. The kind that says, we'll get there.
One step at a time.
I don't know what the future holds for Daniel and me. Maybe we'll rebuild. Maybe we'll just learn to stand beside each other without pain. But I do know this. I didn't survive just to move on. I survived to rise. To build something lasting. To prove to myself that no one else gets to dictate the value of my pain or the power of my comeback. So when people ask me now, how did you do it? I smile. And I say, because I remembered who I was before the world told me to forget. And that's the truth.